At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the left wing of a P-38 Lightning at Doadora Airfield in New Guinea, observing his pilot readying for a mission he probably wouldn't survive. The pilot was Lieutenant Robert Hayes, 23 years old, with 6 combat missions and no confirmed kills. The Japanese had dispatched 18 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters to intercept the morning patrol. Hayes was heading straight into them. McKenna had been servicing P-38s for 8 months. He knew the aircraft thoroughly. Twin-engine fighter, twin-boom layout, fast in a straight line, an absolute powerhouse at high altitude. Yet the P-38 had one critical flaw that was claiming American pilots every day: it couldn't outturn a Zero. The Zero was lighter, more nimble, capable of completing a full horizontal turn in half the time the P-38 needed during a dogfight. That small difference often meant death. American doctrine instructed P-38 pilots never to engage a Zero in a turning fight. Avoid trying to outmaneuver it. Use speed. Use altitude. Dive in. Fire. Climb away. Hit and run tactics. Never get caught in a turning engagement. Hayes had attempted this strategy 5 times. It hadn't worked. The Zeros were too cunning. They lured American pilots into turns, cut inside their radius, got behind them, and shot them down. Over the previous 6 weeks, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s, most falling victim to turning fights they couldn't escape. McKenna had watched too many pilots die. Good men, boys, really. They climbed into their P-38s with confidence, returning only in coffins or never at all. The training manuals blamed pilot error. Instructors said these aviators weren't adhering to doctrine, but McKenna knew the truth. The problem wasn't the pilots, it was the control cables. The P-38's aileron cables ran through the twin booms to the tail and then forward through pulleys to the wing surfaces. There was slight slack, maybe 3/8 of an inch at full deflection, but even that tiny amount caused a lag between stick movement and aileron response. At high speed, it barely mattered. At low speed during aggressive turns, that fraction of a second could mean the difference between staying ahead of a Zero or being shot down. McKenna had raised this issue with the engineering officer 2 months prior. The officer insisted the cable tension was within specifications, factory tolerances allowed for that slack. Adjusting it would void the aircraft warranty. Besides, no field mechanic had permission to modify flight controls without engineering approval from Lockheed, 7,000 miles away in California. So McKenna did something that violated every regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual. He took a piece of piano wire from a damaged plane, cut it to 6 inches, bent it into a Z-shape, and installed it as a tensioner on Lieutenant Hayes's left aileron cable. The modification took 8 minutes, added 0.4 pounds of tension, and removed the slack entirely. Nobody noticed. The morning inspection crew didn't check cable tension, they were focused on engine oil levels and ammunition. McKenna stayed silent, watching Hayes taxi, take off, and vanish into the morning sky toward the Japanese fighters. What unfolded in the next 17 minutes would change how P-38s operated across the Pacific Theater. The first pilot McKenna lost to a Zero was Lieutenant David Chen on July 9, 1943. Chen had been in theater for 3 weeks. McKenna serviced his aircraft every morning. They'd talk about California, Chen from Sacramento, McKenna from Long Beach. Both had worked on cars before the war. Chen took off at 6:15 a.m. for a fighter sweep. 2 hours later he returned with 3 bullet holes in his left boom and a story of a Zero that had slipped inside his turn. He tried to roll and dive away per the manual's instructions, but the plane felt sluggish, delayed between stick input and response. Only his wingman shooting the Zero off his tail saved him. McKenna examined the holes, they were tightly grouped, perfect deflection shooting. The Zero pilot had predicted exactly where Chen's aircraft would be. Impossible if Chen had rolled and dove immediately, unless the delay had allowed the lead shot. Chen's plane went back to the depot for repairs, and he never flew again. 3 weeks later, McKenna heard Chen was killed over Rabaul in another P-38, caught in a turning fight he couldn't escape. The second was Captain William Morrison, an experienced flight leader with 11 confirmed kills. He knew the P-38 inside and out. On August 3, Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Aro Bay. He downed one on the first pass, came around for another attack, and 2 Zeros reversed on him. Radio reports revealed Morrison tried an inverted roll and split-S escape but called out that his controls felt mushy. The Zero stayed on him, shooting him down at 4,000 feet. His wingman observed the plane responding too slowly, as though Morrison was fighting the controls. Morrison died in the crash. His crew chief, Rodriguez from Texas, a friend of McKenna's, examined the wreckage. Engine settings, control surfaces, cable tensions, everything conformed to specifications. Nothing wrong with the airplane. The official report said pilot error. Rodriguez didn't believe it. Neither did McKenna. By mid-August, McKenna had watched 17 pilots die. Some he knew well. Most he'd only met briefly while doing pre-flight checks, but he'd worked on all their aircraft. Had signed off their maintenance logs, had watched them taxi out, watched them take off. Some came back, some didn't. The ones who came back told the same story. The P-38 felt slow to respond in hard maneuvering, like there was a slight lag between control input and aircraft reaction. Most pilots thought that was just how the airplane handled. Heavy fighter, big control surfaces, some delay was expected. But McKenna knew that wasn't normal. He'd felt that delay with his own hands when he worked on the control cables. That tiny bit of slack in the system. He started paying attention to the sound the cables made when he tensioned them during maintenance. There was a specific tone, a sort of low twang when you plucked them. Loose cables sounded different than tight cables. McKenna could hear the difference. Every P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose, within spec, but loose. He mentioned this to Rodriguez one evening after Morrison died. Rodriguez asked what could be done about it. McKenna said, "Nothing official, but unofficially there was a solution. It just required braking regulations that could get them both court-martialed. The problem wasn't that American pilots didn't know what to do. They knew. Every briefing emphasized it. Every training flight drilled it. Never turn with a zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Hit and run. The doctrine was clear. The problem was that combat didn't follow doctrine." Lieutenant Robert Hayes had been in New Guinea for 2 months. 23 years old, farm kid from Iowa. He'd flown 6 combat missions and had 0 kills. Not because he was a bad pilot, because he followed the rules. And the rules kept putting him in positions where he couldn't get a shot. On his 3rd mission, Hayes dove on a zero from altitude, built up speed to 400 miles per hour, came in from the sunlight. The manual said. Got the zero in his gunite, started to pull lead for deflection. The zero snap rolled left. And dove. Hayes tried to follow. His P-38 rolled into the turn, but felt like it was moving through mud. By the time his aircraft pointed where he wanted it, the zero was gone. Hayes pulled out, climbed back to altitude. No shot fired. 4th mission was worse. Hayes and his wingman jumped 2 zeros at 15,000 feet. Hayes got the first burst off, missed the zero. Reversed hard right. Hayes rolled to follow. His wingman called out 2 more zeros coming in from above. Hayes tried to roll back level and dive away. The airplane responded, but slowly. Just slowly enough that one of the diving zeros got a 3s on burst into Hayes's right boom. 20 mm cannon shells. They didn't penetrate, but they scared Hayes badly enough that he broke off the engagement and ran for home with his engine smoking. 5th mission, Hayes watched his wingman die. The wingman's name was Lieutenant Thomas Parker, 21 years old, Boston. They'd gone through training together. On August 14, Parker got separated from the formation during a dogfight over Finchhofen. 2 Zeros got on his tail. Parker tried everything. Rolled hard, reversed, tried to scissor. The Zeros stayed with him through every maneuver. Hayes heard Parker on the radio calling for help. Heard the panic in his voice. Heard him say his airplane wasn't turning fast enough. Heard the gunfire. Heard Parker scream. Then nothing. Hayes didn't sleep that night. Neither did most of the squadron. Parker's bed stayed empty. His personal effects got packed up and shipped home. His P-38 was written off as combat loss. The maintenance log noted no mechanical issues. The official cause was pilot error during defensive maneuvering. McKenna had worked on Parker's aircraft the morning he died. Everything was perfect. Engine timing, control surface alignment, cable tension within spec. The airplane was fine. But Parker was dead anyway. And McKenna knew why. That fraction of a second delay in the controls, that tiny bit of slack that the manual said was acceptable. It had killed Parker just like it had killed Morrison and Chin and 14 others. The worst part was the smell. Every morning McKenna worked in the maintenance area, the smell of aviation. Fuel and hot metal and hydraulic fluid filled his nose. It was the smell of aircraft preparing for combat. Some of those aircraft would come back. Some wouldn't. And McKenna would be there the next morning smelling the same smells, working on more aircraft. Watching more pilots walk out to machines that couldn't respond fast enough to keep them alive. On the evening of August 16, Hayes came to the maintenance area, found McKenna working on his assigned P-38. Hayes asked if there was anything McKenna could do to make the airplane roll faster. Anything at all. Hayes said. He didn't care if it was regulation or not. He just wanted a chance. McKenna looked at Hayes, saw the fear. Saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change. McKenna told Hayes to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 2,300 hours. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air smelled like engine oil and tropical humidity. He pulled the inspection panel off Hayes's P-38 left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands and pulled. Felt the slack. Maybe 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension caught. His hands were covered in grease and his fingers ached from a full day of maintenance work. But he could feel that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire came from a salvaged P-38 that had ground looped 2 weeks earlier. The aircraft was scrap, but McKenna had pulled useful parts before it went to the depot, including a 6 inches piece of high-tensile piano wire from the rudder trim system. He'd kept it in his tool bag without really knowing why. Now he knew. He sat on the hangar floor with the wire and a pair of pliers, bent it into a Z shape. The wire was stiff. Fought back against the pliers. His hand slipped twice, cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls and kept working. Took him 8 minutes to get the bend right. The Z-shape would act as an inline tensioner. Would add just enough preload to the cable to eliminate the slack. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept moving. Shadows jumped across the cable system. His shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin. Dropped it. Heard it bounce. Somewhere in the boom. Spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer found him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial, possibly a dishonorable discharge, maybe prison time. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley, reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand, pulled on the cable. No slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire in his hands, walked out of the hangar at 0115. The tropical night was humid and still. Somewhere in the distance, he heard aircraft engines, Japanese night raiders, probably. The sound made his stomach clench. He just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part. Violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash and McKenna would be responsible. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna went to his bunk, didn't sleep, watched the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30, he walked to the flight line, watched the crew fuel and arm Hayes's aircraft, watched Hayes walk out for his pre-flight briefing, watched him climb into the cockpit. At 0742, Hayes took off. McKenna stood on the flight line and watched the P-38 climb into the morning sky. Watched it join formation with 16 other aircraft. Watched them head northwest toward Japanese airspace. And then all he could do was wait. The engagement started at 0814. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 900 at 13,000 foot over the Huan Gulf. The morning sun was behind them. Perfect setup for a diving attack. Hayes was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a 0 at the back of the formation. Dove from altitude. Built speed to 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger in his gun sight. Hayes could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage. Could see the pilot's head in the canopy. He pressed the trigger. The 450 caliber machine guns in single 20 mm cannon hammered. Tracers reached out. Most missed. A few hits sparked off the Zero's wing. Not enough. The Zero snap rolled right in Dove. Hayes rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay. No lag. The stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never felt his P-38 move like that. It was like the airplane had been waiting for his command and executed it the moment he gave it. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time. Got his nose down. The Zero was right there in his sight picture. He fired again. 3 SE's second burst. The rounds walked up the Zero's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The Zero's engine exploded. Pieces flew off. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Hayes's first kill, but there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out Zeros diving from above. Hayes looked up, saw 3 of them coming down in a shallow dive, coming fast. They'd seen him shoot down their friend. Now they wanted revenge. Hayes shoved the throttles forward, started to climb, but the Zeros were faster in the dive. They'd be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing, keep running. That was the doctrine. But doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left, pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon. He saw the lead Zero. It was turning to follow him, but hadn't expected Hayes to reverse that fast. The Zero was in a bad position. Exposed. Hayes pulled lead, fired, hit the Zero in the left wing route. The wing folded. The Zero tumbled. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly. No delay, no fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. It was like flying a different aircraft. Like someone had removed invisible weights from the control system. 1 Zero made a mistake. Reversed too hard. Bled too much speed. Hayes got inside his turn. Close range, maybe 200 feet he fired. Couldn't miss. The Zero came apart. Pieces of aircraft fell past Hayes's canopy. He felt the P-38 shudder as debris hit his right boom. 3 kills. The 4th Zero ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude. Reformed with what was left of his flight. They headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at Doadora at 0903, McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines, climbed out of the cockpit. His hands were shaking. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna. Hayes said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Hayes's engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475th Fighter Group. He'd been watching Hayes's element engage the Zeros below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes's P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater, knew their skill levels. Hayes was good, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still amped up on adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Hayes said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today, faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Hayes's airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment. Then told him, "The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system." Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to Mitchell's aircraft. McKenna said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month. All caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. Same piano wire tensioner, same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning, came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna he wanted the modification, too. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try. McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire, bend it into a Z-shape, install it as an inline tensioner, takes 8 minutes, changes everything. The modifications spread pilot to pilot and mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation, no engineering approval, just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22 using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 on August 25. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. Lieutenant James Watkins was a crew chief with the 49th Fighter Group stationed at Gussap. He heard about the modification from a pilot who transferred from Doadura. Watkins was skeptical, but he tried it on 1 aircraft. The pilot came back from the next mission with his first kill after 8 weeks of combat. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft. Other crew chiefs in the 49th started doing it too. By early September, maybe 40 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Doadura noticed something was different, but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew, the mechanics knew, nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s every Zero destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed. But officially, nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Airfleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces. 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Waiwak. He used his standard tactic, drew the American into a turning fight, waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll. Knew the timing perfectly. But this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics. But their aircraft were responding faster. Fractionally, but enough to matter, enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit.
Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed.
They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious
modifications.
The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months.
The engines were the same.
The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed.
What the
Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom, a 6 inches piece
of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system, wasn't a new engine.
Just a minor modification to control cable tension.
But that minor modification was killing their pilots.
By mid-September, Japanese pilots were losing aircraft to P-38s at rates they hadn't seen since early in the war.
The
psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, Zero pilots had owned the
sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down.
Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics
would work. The Japanese tried to adapt. Some pilots stopped trying to get into
turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead, but that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability.
Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on
American terms, and the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, and could take more
damage.
Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more
risks.
But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster.
Several experienced Japanese pilots were killed in September trying tactics that had worked perfectly in July. The fundamental problem for Japanese pilots was that they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see.
They knew something had changed, but
they didn't know what, and they couldn't figure out how to counter it.
You can't develop tactics against a modification
you don't know exists.
By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38
fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft.
The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at a better than 1:1 rate. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage.
That order marked a turning point. The Zero had gone from hunter to hunted.
And it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install.
The modification never became official during the war.
The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943 when a
maintenance inspector at Doadora noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification
violated regulations, but it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification experienced noticeably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. The question wasn't whether the adjustment worked, it was whether to reprimand the mechanics who had installed it without permission or quietly endorse it afterward. In November, Lockheed dispatched an engineering team to New Guinea to assess the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated stress loads, and conducted flight trials. Their conclusion: the alteration was safe and effective. It should have been part of the original design. Lockheed incorporated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943, yet McKenna never received official recognition. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documents credited the control system enhancement to engineering analysis. McKenna's name was nowhere to be found. Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, and worked as a crop duster for 37 years.
he never forgot what McKenna had done.
Every year on August 17, Hayes called McKenna to express his gratitude for saving his life.
Mitchell also survived.
He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, and shot down 16 aircraft. After the war, he remained in the Air Force, retiring as a colonel in 1963. He shared the story of McKenna's modification with every young maintenance officer under his supervision, emphasizing that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who notice issues that engineers overlook. McKenna remained in the Army Air Force until 1946, returned to California, resumed working on cars, and opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He maintained engines for 42 years and rarely spoke about the war. When asked, he would simply say he was a mechanic.
Fixed airplanes, that was all.
In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications discovered references to the piano wire tensioner in New Guinea maintenance logs. The historian tracked McKenna down through veteran registries.
By then, McKenna was 73, still working part-time in his garage. He confirmed the story, insisting it wasn't anything extraordinary, just something that needed doing.
The historian estimated the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots, based on improved survival rates in the squadrons that employed it. McKenna said he never tallied the numbers, he simply remembered the pilots who returned: Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, and the others.
That was enough.
James McKenna passed away in 2006 at the age of 88.
He was buried at Pacific View Memorial Park in California.
His obituary noted his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic but made no mention of the piano wire tensioner, the fact that he altered how American fighters flew, or that he had broken regulations to save lives. His Long Beach garage still exists under new ownership. In the back office, however, a faded photograph remains: a young mechanic in coveralls standing beside a P-38 Lightning.
The date on the back reads August 1943, New Guinea.
That's how innovation truly occurs in war, not through official channels or engineering committees, but through sergeants and mechanics who identify problems, devise solutions, and act without waiting for permission to save lives.
If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video.
It helps us share more overlooked stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to remain connected to these untold histories. Each one matters and deserves to be remembered.
We'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below to share where you're watching from.
Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you're part of something special here.
Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.